The topic is the reunification of the South after the Civil War, or Reconstruction. And of course, we're talking to the professor of history at Fisk University, Dr. RMitchell2. And of course, Dr. Mitchell, we promised that during the second segment we would allow you to talk about African American political participation during this period and how Africans became involved in the whole political process and the influence of their involvement during the time.
Well, the beginning is the 13th Amendment, which frees the slaves. And one of the sort of misnomers of history, Lincoln issued a proclamation of emancipation, but it really freed no slaves. The proclamation was aimed at those southern states. It was a more war measure. It said if they didn't cease fighting, their slaves would be free. But none of the South coalesced to his demands. So slavery continued to the end of the war. It was an act of Congress, the 13th Amendment, which freed the slaves. Again, it's the radical Republicans. And as wonderful an act as freeing the slaves was, it was also a way of saying to the South that these people who you've held, these people who much of your economy is based upon, and slavery was an economic activity, are now free. The 14th Amendment will make them citizens of the United States. And then amendments follow, the 15th and whatever, and they're given the vote. Again, as wonderful as the act was, as marvelous as it was, it's also a continuation of that struggle between the North and the South. Suddenly, this Congress, still seen as Northern because the Southern states have been reconstructed, goes in and provides the vote. It puts together a whole new electorate in the South, a large population, which for a brief period of time, the late 1860s, will control the Southern vote. So once you have Reconstruction and blacks are allowed to vote, the Dunning School of Historians, we may then call, describes it as black Reconstruction.
Very good.
The blackness is the fact that some few blacks hold office, never a majority. One interesting political point, though, once black people have the vote, once those former slaves and many of those free blacks who were never slaves have the vote, they aren't terribly punitive. We don't find during black Reconstruction blacks demanding any punishment of the South. The federal Congress would disenfranchise those Confederate leaders who were wealthy, those who were leaders in the Southern governments. They would be imprisoned. But it wasn't acts of black legislatures. It would, in fact, throughout the South, during black Reconstruction, you really find a time when black members of state legislatures, black members of city councils and all, will reestablish and rebuild the South. In Tennessee, for example, the Tennessee legislature, once blacks are a member of it, Samuel McElwee will propose public education. You had never had public education in the South prior to the Civil War. It's during black Reconstruction. Public education for all groups in the South. Certainly this meant for the former slaves a chance, the greatest chance for education. When blacks vote at national elections, they will send 2 senators. And it was only during this political time that we will have 2 black members of the Senate, Hiram Revels and Blanche Kelso Bruce, out of Mississippi. And again, they put forth very progressive legislation. It's under Kelso Bruce that we see the establishment of public education and public colleges in Mississippi. The University of Mississippi is strengthened, but there's also the creation of Alcorn, AMN. There's also the creation of colleges for African Americans. We see schools and hospitals. So during this period, even though there's chaos, we find valuable assistance by African Americans to the American dream. The question is, though, still at the national level, many in the South are upset, they are chagrined. There's still this struggle. The question of why